On the table, we have the CZ75B here and the CZ75B Omega. This video, I want to explain the differences between Omega and regular 75 series. It mainly has to do with the internal sear cage components. They're quite a bit different. Now you see I have some Cage and Gunworks parts here. These are intended for the 75B Omega, and you see there's only a few parts here. That's because if you would like to customize one of these 75B Omegas, there's not as many performance parts available as there is for the regular 75 series because of the internal sear cage mechanism. So in this video, I want to explain the differences between the two, which is going to include the P07, the P09, the P09 Nocturne, and the P01 Omega. It's all the same internal sear cage. It doesn't matter about the frame. It's about the internal parts. So I'm going to field strip them and show you the differences between the two and explain the customizing options that you have between the two series. Long and short, way more customizable, not as customizable. If you look at the Cage and Gunworks page, there's like 4 pages of parts, and there's different pro packages that include everything from A to Z in here. If you look at the 75B Omega, largely they're replacement parts. There's very few performance parts upgrade. That's why you see very few parts here. So I'm going to field strip them and show you the sear cages and explain the differences. So you see I have both of them field stripped. Let's start with the slides. You can see that they pretty much look identical. I know that the recoil spring is a different color. That's because it's a different weight. Cage and Gunworks colorizes the different springs according to how many pounds it is. This one is 14 pounds and this one is 10 pounds. So they don't have the factory recoil spring in either one of them. I have the aftermarket one. So it may look different, but that's just a different weight. They both have the same little nubby plastic guide rod, and there's no hole at the end of the frame to get a full-length guide rod, or there's no option to get a metal guide rod like in the other 75 series models, which is kind of disappointing because it adds like ½ ounce to 3/4 ounce of weight to the gun, depending on if it's compact or full size. Because I just recently bought those, so I know I weighed them. You can customize these the same in both slides. You can change the firing pin and the firing pin spring and the plunger spring. And you see I've bought the firing pin spring here. It's got the lightweight spring in there, and then it also has the plunger spring. So the difference between these two right out of the factory is the Omega is already a little bit lighter in the trigger. It's about 1 pound lighter than the regular 75 series in single action. So right out of the box, they're not identical, not only in the sear cage, but in the trigger pull. Now, when I cage-nize the other one, the 75B Omega slide, I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the trigger pull weight. This one I know is at 3.5 pounds. This one I know is at 4.5 pounds right out of the factory in single action. This has already been way more cage-nized, so I'm curious to see after I install the slide parts and then the parts in the frame what the actual weight's going to come to. But slides are completely interchangeable for the most part. There's no difference in the length, there's no difference in the barrel, the recoil spring's the same, the guide rod's the same, the firing pin, the plunger, completely identical. The difference lies in the frame and in the sear cage, and we'll go over that now. So here we have the 75B and the 75B Omega. Now we're going to look at the sear cages and explain the further differences between the two series. So when you instantly look at them, you can see the one in my right, the Omega, looks a lot more simple than this one here. You see the different springs here that don't exist here. There's actually only 2 springs in this one, where here you have the little plastic piece here that you can't see, you have the detente, and you have the sear cage that has a pin through it that holds the lifter in, and then there's also another spring here that you can't see, and you can see that the mechanism is way more complicated. So when you take one apart as opposed to the other, this is more complex, this is more simple, but the complexity comes with its advantages because you can customize it more. So let's start with the easier Omega System 1 first, and we'll set the regular 75 series down and focus on the Omega to start. With the Omega series comes some of the downfalls for customization though. If we look at the lower frame here, there's not a lot of parts that you can upgrade to performance parts. Cage and Gun Works has a lifter arm or a disconnector that you can buy that's billet steel, and I guess that their claim is that they're more durable. But as far as performance parts upgrades, you can change the hammer spring, the trigger return spring, and the trigger. Everything else is just going to be a replacement part. I wouldn't really say that it's a performance upgrade. So with the simplified Omega system comes some of the downfalls in customization. So it's easier to take apart and it's easier to put back together, and it has the option where you can have manual safety or decocker, which is cool. But reinstalling the decocker is more difficult than the manual safety. It's more parts and more work. There's a hole in the frame that you can't see that I'm going to try to shine a light on. That's where, okay, now you can see it. That's where the decocker spring goes, and then you have to feed the pin through it so it has the mechanism to have the tension on it to click downwards to do the decocking. So I just omitted that and put the manual safety in because it's less steps. You can put the decocker back in. I just think it's more work. Doesn't really matter for full size. I have the decockers for the concealed carry. But that's one of the cool things about the Omega is you can switch between the two. But the downside is not that many customizing options. So I have the hammer spring and I have the trigger return spring. So I'm going to change those two parts in the lower frame, which is going to be really quick and easy, and then change a few parts in the slide, and we're going to see what the upgrades are going to be compared to the regular 75 series. The regular 75 series, I would say, is more customizable and there's more performance parts upgrades. What I've done so far is I've changed the spring and the pin here, so it's a reduced power trigger return spring with the all metal pin, and I've changed to a 13-pound hammer spring. And now I want to take the Sear cage apart and to change the lifter. When you disassemble this, the manual safety version, the Sear cage will come apart as one whole piece. I know that because I've already taken this apart. The decocker ones, I haven't done that yet. So I'm going to start with the manual safety version and then try it on the decocker one. That's what I've yet to do with the 75 series, is take apart the Sear cage, mainly because I didn't have any of the replacement springs, so if I lost one of them I wouldn't be able to put it back together. But I bought all the replacement springs for this and the decocker model, and then soon I'm going to change the lifter and to see if that one part makes a difference in the reset system, because that's one of the pieces of the short reset system. I've already installed all the rest of them, like the extended firing pin that they say that you have to have, which is here. So I'm looking forward to seeing the differences in performance and upgrade that I can get with the 75 series and the Omega series. More customizable, but more difficult and probably more expensive. Here, more simple, but less options. A lot of the parts that you're going to be offered for the Sear cage are just going to be replacement parts, and Cage and Gun Works' claim is that the metal that they use is more durable. It's not going to reduce the trigger pull weight or change the feel in the trigger or anything. So, less customizable, more simple, more difficult. You can switch between manual and safety or decocker. Whatever it comes with, you're stuck with. So there's a few differences between the Omega systems, but for the most part, it's easy to jot it down to the differences in the Sear cage parts. Simple, complex.